Hey everyone, my name's Marc Bates. I'm a metabolic health coach, and today's topic is the corruption of nutrition science. Let's talk about this a little bit. The scientific fraud hiding in nutrition research. Okay, so one of the things that we try to be here is very oriented towards science and presenting studies and stuff for you to understand why we believe what we believe. The problem is there are issues with nutrition science and research. Okay, so while science upholds rigorous standards, modern nutrition research often falls short of these benchmarks. This uncomfortable truth lies at the heart of our current health crisis. While millions struggle with metabolic disease, the very institutions tasked with providing clarity continue producing contradictory, methodologically unsound research that fails to meet basic scientific standards. Professor Bart Kay, the handsome gentleman you saw on the previous slide, who has spent over 2 decades in academia, provides a stark view of this erosion of scientific integrity. His experience unveils a system increasingly influenced by corrupt interests, which overshadows the pursuit of truth. Academia has lost its way. It's become a cesspit, and science has been the loser, Kay states in a recent interview. The corruption of scientific methodology. The problems begin with methodology. Genuine science requires 3 essential components: the data, the methods used to collect that data, and the logical framework connecting data to conclusions. Everything else distracts from these fundamentals. Yet, in nutrition science, these standards have eroded dramatically. Research frequently relies on associational studies that cannot establish causation. An example, right? 1,000 people go to the beach. 800 of those people get sunburn. Of those 1,000 people, 90% of them ate ice cream at the ice cream shop. Ice cream causes sunburn. No, that's not the case. There's an association between going to the beach, eating ice cream, and getting sunburn. But there is by no means any causational link. Okay? And so many of the nutritional studies out there that people rely on use associative studies. They say, 2,000 people in this study, and 60% of them got cancer, and they all ate red meat, so red meat causes cancer. No, it doesn't. What else is involved in there? You got to look at the whole thing. Okay? Nutritional epidemiology, which often lacks sound scientific principles. Okay, epidemiology is a valid science. It's a science that was developed to track diseases, right? Primarily vector-based diseases. A vector-based disease is a disease caused by a pathogen or an insect. Tracking malaria, tracking things caused by West Nile virus, caused by mosquito bites, things caused by bacteria, cholera, things like that. Epidemiology is a beautiful science for that because it helps figure out where the outbreak occurred, right? And from there you can try to find out what caused the outbreak. Okay? Trying to use that science that was designed for something completely different to track down where nutrition is breaking down is really very flawed. It uses completely different methods, uses different outcomes. They just don't match, right? It's like trying to figure out how many gallons of a dry powder is using a dry measure. Yeah, you can kind of figure it out, but it's very different. Okay? So the problem with, once again, we get to nutritional epidemiology, the problem is that while it's following some scientific principles, it's not the correct ones. And investigators freely report selective results from multiple analysis of the data, few of which were very specific. Okay? Now, There are some times where epidemiological evidence works very well in associative. I don't think there's very many people who would claim that cigarettes are not a major contributor to lung disease, heart attacks, cardiovascular disease, stuff like that, right? But all the studies are associative studies. They track who's smoking versus who's not smoking, how many cigarettes people smoke, and what percentage of those who smoke and smoke heavily get these problems. Right? It's associative. While there are some theories on the causes, the studies themselves don't point to the causes. They just point to the associations. But the associations are very strong. Okay? And they're so strong that we can pretty much say, yes, if you are a smoker, you have a higher risk of getting, you're at a higher risk of getting lung cancers and cardiovascular disease because so many people who smoke also get these things. It's not purely causative, and trust me, there are people who I know who smoke who don't get heart disease and don't get cancer, right? And there are a lot of people who believe in that. My brother, who died of lung cancer, told me for years, smoking doesn't cause lung cancer. Yeah, well, he died from lung cancer. Okay, associative studies have a place, but the associations have to be very strong. They have to be followed for many years, and you have to get rid of as many confounding factors as you can. Okay, so do be wary of people who say, oh, we had this 6-month study and we now know that red meat causes cancer. Can't happen. Okay? Other big thing, and I've been saying this on many videos, follow the money. Corporate influence has transformed nutrition research into a vehicle for product promotion rather than truth discovery. The mechanics are straightforward. Companies fund research groups to produce favorable outcomes. These researchers then submit papers to journals, which are often financially dependent on the same corporate interests. These create a closed system where industry-funded nutrition research faces widespread skepticism about its credibility and transparency, even when published in highly regarded peer-reviewed journals. The result, a scientific literature polluted with conclusions designed to sell products rather than improve health. Our new HHS secretary, RFK Jr., he sees this as a major problem, and I agree with him. He is trying to get the NHS to produce some non-funded publications so that people can publish journal entries that are not polluted by corruption. And also, he's trying to get rid of as much as possible these studies that are funded by industry to prove a specific point. And so they're usually short term. You can tell by the way the science was put together that it was intended to prove a point. And by the way, if they do a study, let's say Kellogg's wants to put out a study that says eating Frosted Flakes is the healthiest thing you can eat. They can create a study, they can fund it, they can produce it out there, and if at the end of their 6-week study or whatever, they don't get quite the results that they want, they have a couple choices. They can choose to reinterpret the data, and a lot of people have done that. They can choose to look at the data from a slightly different perspective. I'm not going to say they're cherry picking the data, but that's what happens a lot. But more importantly, ultimately, they just don't publish the data. And we've got a lot of studies that are just starting to come out 20 years after the research was done, where the original research said, oh, cholesterol is a direct contributor to heart disease. And 20 years later, they said, oh, well, if you actually look at all the data they collected, which they didn't publish, that's not what the study showed. So, yeah, it's a problem within nutritional research. You just have to be aware of that. Okay, the decline of academic standards. Oh, this is a big one. Universities themselves have contributed to this deterioration. Where academic institutions once prioritized rigorous teaching and research standards, they now focus increasingly on student satisfaction metrics. Right? It used to be when I went to college, the college I went to, because I was going in for business and accounting, right, was considered one of the best colleges in my area for accounting because only half the people who were trying to get an accounting degree and get signed up with one of the big, at that point, big 8 firms and become a CPA and stuff, only about half of them actually passed. And that was a source of pride that, hey, we have rigorous standards, and only people who graduate here are known to know their stuff. Well, that's changed because the schools are no longer caring about that. They're worrying more about what did the students say. Was my experience good? Were the professors good for me? Did they make me feel good? Right? It's like it's changed a whole lot since I've been in school. Okay, Bart Kay says that when he finished his academic studies in 2018, the important metric was the students' ideas about their experience in our class. See, and that's a big difference because when I finished my studies years before that, it was all about what was the value, did they actually teach you something valuable and how did they prove that? So the shift reflects a broader abandonment of scientific disciplines in favor of marketability. Truth has become secondary to palatability. The consequences extend beyond the classroom. When universities fail to instill proper scientific methodology in students, they produce graduates incapable of distinguishing between robust research and sophisticated marketing. Right? Alright, real quick, everyone, please. It helps the channel a great deal if you would subscribe, like, click the bell button if you want to get notified. We're here to try to help you. Thank you very much. Okay, let's talk about hard sciences versus nutrition science. Okay, not all scientific disciplines have succumbed equally to these problems. Biochemistry, human physiology, chemical anthropology, and physics maintain stricter methodological standards. Right? These are hard sciences. These are more often offer reliable frameworks for understanding human health than nutrition science, right? Which often lacks controlled experimental conditions and relies heavily on self-reported data. Okay? So, when I tell you that anthropological data using nitrogen composition of the bones shows that our earliest ancestors, primarily ate meat based on nitrogen. We know that if you eat protein, you get a lot of nitrogen, and it develops in the bones. You can find it in the bones. That's hard science, right? No one's suggesting that we go in and do a survey of Neolithic peoples. Can't be done, obviously, but you get the idea, right? When I talk about how the cell works, how the Krebs cycle operates, how the Randall cycle operates, right? How you produce energy from the two basic types of foods that produce energy: carbs, right, in the form of glucose, and fatty acids, right, fat, and how these are where basically all the energy that your body produces comes from, and how they work in the cell. That's hard science, right? You can have 1,000 people who claim that vegetables are the best thing you can eat, right? There's no science behind what they're doing. What I'm presenting you is hard science, okay? That's very different. This consistency provides a more reliable foundation, right? Rather than doing a survey saying, we surveyed 1,000 people and they all said they hated broccoli, so broccoli is not a good food. And broccoli may not be a good food, but the idea is it's not based upon some, survey you gave. It's based upon evolutionary paleoanthropology, comparative anatomy, physics, right? How things actually break down, human physiology, how the body was designed, right, to function. These all play into what makes up the proper human diet. Okay, the qualification problem. Here's another problem, right? there's unqualified people who are offering health consultations rather than adequate training or expertise. And I'm personally in a field where it's rampant, right? Health coaching, you don't need to be very qualified to claim to be a health coach. And I'll tell you right up front, I'm not a doctor. I have not done this research, but I have done a lot of academic work. So I know how to read research studies. I'm pretty good at the science. I'm not perfect at it, but I do rely on some people who are excellent at the science to help interpret the data. So my qualification is I provide access to really highly qualified people, and I try to make it simpler and easier for you to understand and how to use it in your everyday life. Okay? That's my qualification. I don't claim to be the researcher. I claim to be able to read the research data and try to help you interpret it. Okay? And help you see what's real. There are a lot of people out there, though, who claim to have a PhD in something and claim that they know what they're doing, and they have no idea what they're actually doing their studies on. And they have no idea what they're doing. So evaluate the expertise. And this is something that you can tell yourself, once again, if you follow the money. A lot of times people will say this is the best thing for your diet, and they really have an agenda to push. Okay? You gotta watch for that. Okay, statistical literacy versus scientific citizenship. Oh, this is a big one. Understanding statistical methodology represents the dividing line between those qualified to comment on scientific research and those who are not. Professor K emphasizes this point. If you want to critique, publicly comment, or be seen as competent to speak about science, one of the requirements is you must yourself be capable of being presented with raw data set that those authors collected and analyze that data set yourself statistically. Right? This standard eliminates most popular health commentators who typically lack the mathematical training to evaluate study methodology. And this is where I will stand up that I have some capability here. Because in my PhD studies, which were based on business degrees, the first full year of your PhD studies for me was statistics. It was all statistics. How do we tell what's a real significance? What is a p-value? How can you hack the p-value to give you data that you want, whether the data actually shows that or not? I mean, there's all kinds of things out there that people who kind of know statistics but don't follow the rules very well can make things say almost anything they want, right? So let's not don't assume somebody knows right off the bat, but make sure that they can follow it up with legitimate evidence. Okay, reclaiming scientific integrity. Ooh, sorry about that. The path forward requires recognition that in science three things matter: epistemologically, the data, the methods used to collect that data, and the logic connecting the data to conclusions. Everything else constitutes a distraction. Consumers of scientific information must develop the critical thinking skills necessary to evaluate research claims. This includes understanding study design, statistical analysis, and funding sources. You don't have to be a PhD in statistics. You don't have to have all that math behind you. But do understand, right? If you follow some basic rules, okay, that assume that what people will say is not correct, and force them to say it, and their study should help prove, right? The whole goal in the statistical analysis of data is not to prove your data, prove your point, but to see if it disproves your point, right? For my PhD studies, we did multiple surveys showing how certain business processes were more efficient than others, and 3 of the 4 disproved our thoughts. And that's important. You should be trying to disprove your thoughts, not try to prove your point. So you gotta look at it. And there are plenty of great people out there who have legitimate PhDs in nutrition or in physical sciences, chemistry, biochemistry, and stuff like that, who look at these studies and they comment on. These are people I follow, and I try to present this data to you. Okay, so that's where I'm getting it from. Just be aware of where people are getting this stuff from. Okay, yes, there is a little kitten in my office right now. Okay, becoming a better consumer of science. Okay, if you don't have the mathematics background, if you don't have the science background, don't just believe somebody because they're saying something that you like. Get multiple views of opinion on that. Find out what type of data they're using to prove their evidence, right? And then consider some of the basic things, right? If somebody tells you that we should be eating vegetables, okay, consider the evolutionary context, okay? And for my Christian friends, and I'm a deep believer in God, right? There is still some great consistency in understanding evolutionary context, right? That's like, I go back to the human gut system, right? Our gut was designed to eat fat and protein, not carbohydrates. The way our bodies work, the way we produce energy, right? That's the evolutionary context, how the design of our body is. Or, once again, if you believe completely in evolution, you go back to, Paleolithic days or even before that, right? How did we develop? How did we get the brains that we have? How do we get the body that is designed to produce, to eat fats and proteins, right? And not eat carbs. How did that come about? But why do we have the ability to eat carbs? Well, because you can't always hunt down a bison, and you've got to eat what's available to you. So eating some carbs is in evolutionary context, is a great adaptation to help you survive, right? Keep things in those contexts. So somebody tells you, oh, we should be eating nothing but vegetables. Well, modern agriculture has only been around about 10,000 years, right? In an evolutionary context, your body has not adapted to anything yet. So how can they say that the human body is designed to do this when obviously the human body was designed to live through times of lean hunger, when we were hunter-gatherers, when we were out there eating mostly meat, right? You got to keep things in perspective. So anyone who tells you we were designed to eat vegetables, they have no idea what they're talking about, okay? They really don't. Okay, the future of scientific integrity. The current crisis in scientific integrity, particularly in nutrition research, represents both danger and opportunity. The danger lies in continued public confusion, deteriorating health outcomes, and growing distrust in scientific institutions. The opportunity emerges from increasing awareness of these problems, which could lead to reform and renewal of genuine scientific standards. Professor K's perspective on this is very good. He says there's a valuable framework for navigating this landscape by understanding the deterioration of scientific standards, i.e., don't believe all the framework, everything you're reading, because follow the money. Why are they doing the study? Who's paying for it? And are they hiding something from you? You have to be skeptical, okay? Actual science remains our best tool for understanding the world and improving health. But science requires discipline, and it can't be corrupted by corporate interests, and that's what has happened for the most part in the last 40 years. All right. Thank you for watching. This was a tough one because I stumbled over some of the words, but also because there's just topics here that some people are not ready and willing to accept. Do question me, right? Question everyone else you're listening to, but see where the consistency comes in, and that's what you're looking for. So thank you for watching. Once again, please comment. Give me ideas of what you want me to follow up on with. Ask questions. This is a community. We're here to help each other. Thank you so much.